hello to all of our friends in the JBS community. It's so wonderful to be back with you and here with two of my very dearest colleagues, Rabbi Elliott Cosgrove from Park Avenue Synagogue and Rabbi Chaim Steinmetz from Kehilath Jeshurun. And it is a conversation, a rabbinic conversation really with friends that we get to share with our wider community. And it is such a pleasure. We've done this before for different holidays. We've talked about Hanukkah. This time we're doing, not that I'm supposed to have favorite holidays, but really one of my favorite holidays, maybe yours as well, talking about Passover as a theme, and not only some of our own personal memories, but these larger themes of liberation and redemption that the world deeply needs to be reminded of right now in our own community. So please join us. I would like to say that we rehearsed every bit of this conversation, but to be honest, part of the joy of this is that it's not rehearsed at all, that we've thought of some questions we'd love to hear the answers from each other. And then in real time, we're having a genuine, authentic conversation. We'll jump in with each other as Jews are wont to do, and I know that I come away learning things from my colleagues from these conversations as well, and we hope that you will as well. So thank you for joining us.
And what's so sweet about this moment is it really is an ongoing conversation. Years and years and years, our communities are sister-brother conversations. We program together, we work together, we have friends, we're at the table together. Hine ma tovu manayim. How good it is that we're all sitting biyachad, just like any other moment, except now we're on film. So, you know what I think, what are we calling each other? Rabbi or Angela, Chaim, and Elliott?
Well, we'll go with first names.
Okay,
yeah,
we'll go with
that's
first
totally
name.
fine.
You know, I think, what's the magic, Angela? Because you sort of said it's my favorite. I think it's beyond ritual. I think it goes sort of to the core, some memories that are sort of embedded in our very souls. Like I remember seders of old. I remember in my parents' house. I remember the responsibility I feel giving my own children, like the silly jokes, like every single year. There is a moment in the Seder where I turn to my children, now all grown up, and I say, what's the lion's favorite thing at the Seder? And they groan, and I say, Ma, roar. And it always hits. It always hits. But it's like family dynamics on steroids. Right, and we all sort of play a role. So I'm wondering, just to kick off the conversation, Chaim, maybe you, and then you, Angela, like, just share, like, what's a warm memory that you have of a Seder of old?
Look, I mean, I think one of the classics for people who live in the suburbs is that when you open the door for Elijah, one of the kids sneaks out beforehand, dresses up as Elijah, and comes to the door.
That was me.
That was always you.
Because I'm Eliyahu. I was actually born on Passover, and so there was always that moment.
So what, you had a white beard, and it's, I have to tell you, it's something that's incredibly special. It's kind of a moment where the kids get engaged. And that's a large part of what the Seder is. The Seder is about engaging your children. It's about using food. It's about conversation. It's about using every possibility to retell this story. I mean, again, just think about how we start the Seder really with food. It's about special foods that tell a story. And so, yeah, I mean, what I love about it is those little things where sort of the kids decide, oh, I want to be part of this. I want to do this thing that's really cute so that I can make my impact, add my little piece to the Passover Seder and tell the story my way. So I guess you were the Elijah. I don't remember if I was ever an Elijah. I remember my niece being the Elijah once, and she was an excellent Elijah. She walked up the stairs very slowly with real theatrical quality, and it's something that I really remember.
Well, I feel cheated because we never had an Elijah that I could see. But when I ran to the door and I came back, every time I couldn't believe that the cup had gone totally down. And I was like, how did that happen? It was magic. I don't know. To this day, I'm still not exactly sure. Elijah was very quick in my house, so in and out. I have two memories that I just want to share, although there are so many. One is that my grandmother was the first in her family that was born in America. Her older siblings were born in Romania. They came over at the turn of the century, and she grew up in a Yiddish-speaking home and learned to make gefilte fish from scratch in this contraption that looked like it was a torture device called a meat grinder. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Like tacks onto your, you attach it to your table, and then you stick disgusting. It looked to me as an 8-year-old, exactly. As an 8-year-old, putting fish into a meat grinder, there's almost nothing more gross. But I loved that, like, you stuck this thing in, you like wound the thing, it came out in like a big mush pile, you stuck it in the matzah meal, you did whatever. I loved making gefilte fish with my grandmother. And then she stuck a bunch of like fish heads and bones into the broth. And this whole thing, I was like, I feel like I'm in another century. This must be how they made it in the old world, which it definitely was. So that is a memory of just kind of making gefilte fish from scratch with my grandmother that I absolutely loved. And then I would just fast forward to many, many decades later, and my first child was born, Gabriel, and I wanted to name him for my grandmother, who at that point had passed away. Her name was Frida, but she strangely spelled it with a PH. So I was looking for a P name. Well, turns out he came 2.5 weeks early so that his bris was the morning of Pesach. So we named him Gavriel Pesach. Pesach for my grandmother, Frida with a P. And that night, I remember we had the bris in the morning, and I couldn't manage to get out of, like, basically after I dealt with the bris and got people out of my house, I had to go into my pajamas. And that night we had just my immediate family, my in-laws at the table. I had seder in my pajamas with an 8-year-old newly circumcised Gavriel Pesach, and I reclined on many, many pillows because I was nursing him through most of the dinner. And I was like, I don't know if this is freedom, but I am definitely never going to forget this seder.
You know, it is interesting that I read somewhere that Passover is the most observed holiday of American Jews, right? More than any other holiday. And here we are, 3 congregational rabbis, right? Its power is that it's not synagogue-based.
Yes.
It's home-based.
What's your favorite memory?
And my favorite, well, definitely the Elijah moment when I was there. You know, seeing the revving up of the family dynamic towards, right? I grew up in a traditional household, so getting ready, and everyone was assigned their part of the seder, and everyone was told to take a nap beforehand because we were expected to stay up as children. And then when the grandkids started coming, there used to be a little play prior to it where we reenacted, like in the newest born, there'd be a baby Moses who'd be pushed down the bulrushes,
Right.
as if, and it was just like everyone brought their A game. The food, the song, the kitsch, it was just it just created this muscle memory of just of warmth, of hamishness, of connection to tradition. You knew the songs were being sung from generation to generation, and there was sort of this refreshing sense of creativity that was also like, oh, someone's got a new song. Someone knows. I remember the first time we had our Persian friends over to our seder, and they started hitting each other at Dayenu with the scallions
or the leeks. Yes, I've seen that.
What's going on here? But no, it was great. Like, my parents are formal English, whatever, but they were like all in, because you're ready to learn different traditions, and you realize we're all part of a global Jewish people. So it's just, there's just such a sweetness to it. But we got to get down to brass tacks. It's like Rabban Gamliel at the end of the Seder.
Yes.
That if you don't do this,
summary,
we'll never be invited back by JBS. So
that's right.
They said, do this show because everyone needs something fresh to say about the Seder. Right, because everyone's been through the Haggadah a million times. So maybe we'll do a quick go around of something we can teach. We all brought our Maxwell House or Art Scroll Haggadah here, but Angela, you want to kick us off with a favorite part of the Haggadah?
Sure. So I want to start by the fact that we talk a lot about Jewish history, but I want to debunk the myth. There is no such thing as Jewish history. What do I mean by that? We don't even have a word for it in our tradition. Historia. That's not an indigenous Hebrew word, right? So instead what we have is memory. And I think it's really powerful to imagine that we are a people of memory, not necessarily of history. History is something that could happen to other people. History exists if you wrote it in a book and stuck it on a shelf. It exists even without you. Memory only exists with people who are remembering. Like, right, memory doesn't exist without the rememberer. And this is the mandate of what it is to be a Jew, and particularly on this holiday. I want to point out my favorite line in the Haggadah, which is, B'chol dor vador, chayav adam lirot et atzmo, ki'ilu hu yatsa mimitzrayim. So, here it is, in every generation, every human being, every person is obligated to see himself or herself as if they personally went out from Egypt. So what that means is we're not supposed to say our ancestors were slaves, or even like my great-grandparents were oppressed. We, in every generation, have to know what it's like to be enslaved ourselves. Because the point is not to tell a story of someone else. The point is actually to create that Jewish memory for ourselves of enslavement. And I find that to be maybe the most powerful thing we can do. And we do it in many ways, by beating ourselves with leeks, perhaps by just ingesting the bread of affliction and not being able to go to the bathroom for a week, we taste our tears, we eat the mortar that we used. But the point is not just to talk about it as someone else's story, but as our lived experience. And the Seder is perhaps the best pedagogical tool we have for creating Jewish memory, although we are commanded to do that with all sorts of things. I love that every time I pass that Torah to a child at a bar bat mitzvah, I say, they're at Sinai. They're not just talking about a time when Sinai happened. They are actually at Sinai in that moment. They are creating that new Jewish memory. So I think the idea of us as memory keepers is the theme of Passover, and I think we don't have a better holiday for helping us understand what that means.
Beautiful.
No, I mean, I love that thought. I mean, I have other parts of the Haggadah I want to talk about, but I love that thought because also, like, if you think of memory that way, is that we're sort of reimagining what it was like in Egypt. You also kind of link up with so many different generations of Jews at different points who've had that experience. And as I mentioned earlier to the two of you alone, I'm taking a trip to Ethiopia next week, and it's to visit with the remnants of the Jewish community. There's actually several thousand Jews that are there. And one of the stories that really sticks in my mind is in 1991, when Operation Solomon was taking place. And it happened overnight. It happened a little bit after Shavuot. Now, what had happened was that whoever was responsible managed to ship the matzah to the Ethiopian Jews. They were bringing matzah to them before they left, and it got there late, so it didn't get there in time for Passover. And then overnight, they had to bring all the Jews from the countryside to Addis Ababa, and they needed to feed them. And it turns out that just before they're leaving Ethiopia, they go in the storehouse, and what do they have to feed the Ethiopian Jews before they're leaving their country in Operation Solomon? Matzah.
Wow.
And it's a matzah story, which is part of this large Pesach story. And there are so many matzah moments in our history. And so I love this B'chol dor vador, because it's not only that we have to imagine ourselves being in Egypt, we have to imagine that this happened many times.
Oh, so true.
And that there's so many exoduses that we can talk about times when we've left from affliction and slavery.
Right.
Beautiful.
We got to come back to that. We got to come back to who's looking for liberation this year, right?
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Maybe let's.
So
put
do
a
you
pin
have a
in it.
favorite part, though, that's
I
not that
do.
good? Okay,
I
tell
love,
us. I mean, I want to hear.
the problem is I have many favorites. So when we discussed this, I said, well, let's go with the first paragraph, halach ma'anya, which is essentially an invitation for people to come to the Seder. It may be a little bit out of place, but let's just take it for what it is. We start the Seder with an invitation, and we turn to people and we say, whoever is hungry, let him come and eat. Whoever is needy, let him come and celebrate Passover. And first I want to just say two things about it. One, which is a beautiful thought from Rabbi Joseph Ber Soloveitchik, where he says, the first one is whoever is hungry, because there are people who need to come to a Seder because they're hungry. So he says, and what is whoever is needy? So he says, well, there are people who need to come to a Seder because they need companionship. There is a hunger that's not just a hunger for food. There's a hunger for community, for family, and there are people who really need to be invited to our seders, and we need to be sort of conscious of saying, well, this person may not have a seder. Let's bring them in. But the second thought, which is one of my own, is why does the seder start with this invitation for guests? And I think it's because that's part of the process of freedom, is that the mindset of the slave is that they're a victim. I can't take care of myself. I can't do anything for myself. And when you become a host, you're flipping the mindset. Even if you're incredibly poor, but if you can find it in your heart to maybe take a bit of your loaf of bread, well, maybe not on Pesach, but you take a bit of your loaf of matzah and you hand it to someone else, that also liberates you because it changes your mindset.
Beautiful.
That's gorgeous.
Love that.
Can I ask a follow-up question of that? I'm just thinking about it as you're focusing on the hospitality of halachma, the very opening words. It strikes me that significant, never thought about this, that it's in Aramaic. And much of the, I guess you have Chad Gadya at the end, which is Aramaic, but the vast majority of, and not everyone picks that up, that, it's all in Hebrew script, and so what's in Aramaic, what's in Hebrew. But I'm wondering if there might have been a time when the Hebrew might have been inaccessible, so they wanted to make sure, the compilers of the Haggadah, that would be understandable to everybody.
Right, and this is clearly meant to be in the vernacular. And by the way, look, the Haggadah needs to be read in a language that people understand. I like to point out that in the Shulchan Aruch, there are glosses from Rabbi Moshe Isserles, which is the Ramah. And he writes that and he brings it from a rabbi in London, that if people at the Seder don't understand the Hebrew, read it in the language that people understand, which is a very powerful thought, because it's not a ritual just to simply repeat the words. It's a ritual to really let those words enter into your mind and into your heart.
I think a corollary to your beautiful teaching about when you become the host, you're then truly free, is also, I think, you no longer are the stranger. Because if you, once you bring someone in, you become the host, you've brought in the person who's more strange than you, and it actually transforms you in that way as well. And so I think in particular, it feels like you've got to make that invitation in the vernacular that people understand. And I love that teaching. It's going to stay with me. Thank you. Yeah. What about you? What's your favorite part?
Well, I want to...
Or a favorite line.
I want to try to wrap in a lot of favorite parts in one answer.
That's cheating.
I know it's cheating, but... So I was just thinking of the symbols of the Seder, and I want to try this thought out on you, that each symbol of the Seder has more than one meaning, right? So Chaim, when you just said, this is a bread of affliction, right? Why do we do it? Because it's a poor man's bread to remind us of our servitude. But at other parts of the Haggadah, why do we eat matzah? Because it didn't have time to rise, and in our haste we left Egypt. So that same matzah that's the bread of our affliction becomes the bread of our freedom. The salt water, what does it represent? Well, we teach kids in Hebrew school, it represents tears, right? But we also know that based on sort of the dipping and the symposia background of the Seder, it symbolizes what a person in luxury, only a free person has the ability to dip their food. So on the one hand, tears, on the other hand, freedom. The charoset, on the one hand, it's the mortar, right? It reminds us of the pyramids that were being built by the Hebrew slaves. On the other hand, it's the sweetness to counterbalance the maror. So I'm thinking of these multiple explanations, and maybe there's other ones as well, that signal something deeper about the Seder. That the substance is the same, but we're transformed over the course of it, right? It's not just that we begin the Seder and as slaves and end the Seder as free women and men, but the matzah, the salt water, the haroset, the symbols remind us of the potentiality of renewal within each one of us, right? That it's how you look at it, it's how we ourselves can enter into Passover as one thing, and with a opportunity to leave another. So
it's like mignut l'shevach, like from degradation to praise. I do think that there is like a warning in there, both that it can hold both of those things, the complexity of it, and we can go, that is hopefully the journey, is that you go from the affliction to the freedom, right? Or from the tears to the sense of, higher status or freedom. But I think that there's also a warning in there that you can also go backwards. Like we can become degraded in some way. And I think that we are living in a time right now where in some ways there's a lot of freedom we feel, and we also feel that things are being degraded and discourse is being degraded. And I think some people are worried, as they were last year, about what the tenor of the conversation at their tables might be like. And I think I love your teaching about those symbols, that there's room in our tradition for a symbol to hold kind of almost polar opposite meanings within it. And I think it says that it's how we're going to behave, like what it's going to mean in that moment. And hopefully we're going to Shevach, but...
Well, I mean, civil discourse is a serious topic, I think, for many seders. I think that there are family members that find it difficult to sit together. And I'm just wondering what the two of you tell your congregants when they say, I'm inviting someone who has such different views than I do, and I'm afraid we're going to get into a yelling match at the seder.
Yeah, it's a great question, Chaim, because I get those conversations, people being disinvited from Seder. I just can't deal with their politics. I just, not at the Seder table. And on the other hand, the whole foundation of the Seder is civil dialogue, right? We're trying to model something of Jews coming together from different backgrounds, different inclinations, and figure out a way. I mean, I often think, and it's not perfect, I don't know what to do with the wicked child, because the wicked child of the 4 children gets his teeth wrapped, right? So not every idea is welcome at the Seder table, it would seem, unless one of you has a different interpretation of maybe it's just the child who dares to ask a certain kind of question. But for me, and part of this is biographical as well. I'm one of 4 boys, and so for me it was always very.
Which son were you at the Seder?
You want to guess? Which
You
son
were
was
the
I?
wicked son.
Well, no, which
Wise,
one was I?
You were the
know.
wise son.
No, I was a simple son. I was a simple
Really?
son. I'm the third.
Okay.
The third. I have 2 older brothers and one younger brother. But it was always like this thing that my parents never called on that one for this one, because lest we believe ourselves to... Anyway, this isn't therapy, this is JBS. But the point of the story is that all 4 sat together at the same table. And that, I think, is really important. And I think this idea of intentional listening, I think of teaching others and ourselves to be curious, not furious, right? To hear an idea that's not your own, and to interrogate that idea even as you interrogate your own beliefs, and realize that a good argument is one not so much in one person out debating the other, but in the 2 individuals able to house dissent within that relationship. I think it's so countercultural, right? We all live in our social media silos, the algorithms inclining us to listen to only those opinions that reinforce what we already believe. And then comes a Seder that says, no, you got to sit across the table from someone, you have to have a conversation with them, you actually have to dignify their humanity, even as you struggle to make sense of their beliefs. I think it's delightfully countercultural and urgently needed.
Amen to that. I would say that in many ways, the highest pedagogical tool of the seder is asking a good question. And actually, we're supposed to teach our children to learn to ask good questions. So we seed a few of these, but really the whole point is to get them to ask questions. And I think so often, especially when we are across the table from someone with whom we disagree about something, maybe something we feel really passionate about, something that we think is existential for the Jewish people. I get it. That our first desire is to convince, maybe compel, maybe argue with, and instead there is not a sense of like, why don't we ask them a question that helps me understand where they're coming from? Not a question to try to interrogate, but a question to truly try to understand. And I think that that's part of what the Haggadah has invited us to do, is to do that. We're trying to understand, so let's ask a question or several questions, as opposed to saying, I'm coming in to tell you what you need to know. And I think if we came in with more of that curiosity and that mindset, that would be great. I also learned through my Institute of Jewish Spirituality time that there is a real need for resilient listening, which is actually sometimes letting people talk where you're not actually responding. You're not going to solve it. You're not going to respond. You're not going to argue. You're just going to hear them and say, Shamati, I heard you. And that's all. And you can just leave it there and just say, you don't even have to say I disagree. You could say, I heard what you said. And I think that if there's room for that, with a sense of kind of a spaciousness of heart and generosity, because these are people that you want to be in relationship with. You invited them to your seder, and even if they're strangers, you want to be in relationship in a moment like this. That and good questioning, I think that would help a lot around these tables.
Right. I mean, I
What
think
about
it's
you?
just, I think it's really just focusing before you sit down and saying to yourself, okay, what comes first? And love comes first. And so I'm not going to again, we have these arguments about politics. And honestly, what I think and what the person across from me thinks isn't going to change anything politically, right? So, but we're all like so excited about, well, what do you think? What do I think? At best, you're two voters. Like, I mean, what are you? So you have to sort of resolve to yourself and say, look, we have reasons to love each other. And there's a lot of reasons, and families need to stick together. I like to tell people, you don't have extra brothers and sisters, and you don't want to just sort of cast one away because you've got some sort of a dispute. You want to hang on to them. And so I think that first, just focus on what your priority is before you sit down. And everyone has to say to themselves, okay, we're coming together because we love each other. And then the next, and this is a very radical thought, you could have conversations on other topics other than politics.
You think?
Other than politics. There are other topics. Right. We've actually managed, for almost 30 minutes to have a conversation now that's not about politics. And I think that that's really what we need to look at the Seder. There's how people's lives are doing. There's how people's work is doing. There's just even the ideas of the Seder, like the ideas of how we come together as a people. What is it? Well, maybe what is it to be a Jew? It might be too controversial, but there's so many other things to talk about. And if we put love first and we say, let's take politics off the table, then you can have a successful Seder.
Can I just say, you really walk that walk, Rabbi. And I say that because sometimes people, when they hear about our friendship as a threesome or just, in any way, and the fact that we can do programming together, the fact that we've traveled to Israel together, they're particularly interested that an Orthodox rabbi is in that kind of relationship with us. And I say it's because Rabbi Steinmetz really puts Ahavat Yisrael at the top of his priority list. And yes, we don't probably, if we wanted to dig down into a bunch of different things, we wouldn't agree on everything. But you really model that and embody that, and I'm so grateful. It's part of why we can be at this table together.
Right. Well, we should talk about, to me, it's distressing that we're considered to be the outlier, that we're the exception of the rule.
Right. See, I think to myself, how great must Chaim Steinmetz's love for me be in order to overlook all the things with which he disagrees with me? I mean, it's worse
for me. It's worse for me, I'm sure.
It must just be enormous.
But this strange thing is that we agree on so much.
That's true.
And we always focus on the 3% we don't agree on. And part of this whole cancel culture is sort of like, I mean, I will be honest, I do get sent by members, and you may get this too, sermons from other rabbis. And like, isn't this outrageous? Not so outrageous. I agree. What's wrong with agreeing with 85%? Like the other 15%, no, we have to like tamp down and not allow that 15% be disagreed with. And we should really look for how we can get along, how we can get together, because that's so important. I mean, there aren't that many Jews in the world.
They really are.
And we really recognized, I think, since October 7th, how critical it is for us to be unified. And when we're not unified, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
It's so rare that they're going to celebrate the fact that the three of us are friends. Not exactly that, but I love the fact that the Jewish Community Relations Council is asked if we would be honored together. And I was so touched by the idea that I could be honored with the two of you that I think if I'd just been asked, I would have said no. But when I was asked to do it with the two of you, I was like, well, how can I say no to that? So, and I don't think it's just about a friendship. It's also about recognizing you're right, in particular post-October 7th, that our needs as a community in supporting Israel, our needs in fighting anti-Semitism, our needs in like securing our communities, our needs in actually reviving and sustaining the joy and meaning of what it is to be Jewish, which is what we talked about for the first half hour. Those are so much bigger than the other things that you're right that divide us, and it is important to lift that up as a model and to say this is not only possible, it's absolutely essential and necessary right now.
Right. They're also doing great work, the JCRC, right? They're at the front line of not cross-communal dialogue, representing our people in front of other civic and faith communities, not to mention all the community security initiatives, the CSI stuff, that really on the front lines of keeping our communities safe.
Well, we sadly experienced that just last month, where it was actually CSI that caught a threat that was made online, very specifically about targeting Central Synagogue and the specific Friday night, it's the time, and this crazy person was driving in a truck from Utah to come to Manhattan to, as he said, to kill some Jews. And so I tremble thinking about what would have happened had CSI not found that at 2:00 on Friday and flagged it, and then had such amazing relationships with NYPD and the FBI to be on it completely. And he was arrested at the Lincoln Tunnel before coming into Manhattan. But I think about how critically important that is, and they're doing this for the much wider Jewish community, and they're doing it in all sorts of forms, and we need them.
It's as important as ever.
Yeah.
I do feel that maybe not politics, but I'd love to pivot just for a second and talk about Israel, because Chaim, the beginning of the Haggadah says, this year we're here, next year De'ara B'Yisrael, and the end, many Passover seders end with Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. It seems that even though this is the story of our liberation from Egypt and servitude, it's also was understood from generation to generation about our entry into the Promised Land, which until 1948 was an abstract proposition. We aspired for it, we sought it, we strove to enter, we prayed for it, our synagogues were directed towards it, and now we actually have it, right? And now here we are with Israel as a building block, a constituent building block of our Jewish identity. And I'm just, I can't help but think of how we began the conversation, that, every year, every generation, the familiar text is overlaid on our identities a little bit differently, because we're a little different and the world's a little different. We've now already had an October 7th Passover. This is our second one that we are encountering, and we are totally occupied emotionally, politically, communally with the well-being of our brothers and sisters in Israel. So I'm just wondering, when you sit down at your seders and you're putting the needs of the Jewish people, the state of Israel, what's the message this year?
I think the message is probably same as it's been always, is that, we say next year in Jerusalem, our hearts are always with Israel. I mean, that's like a fundamental part of all of the there's like two verses in the Bible, in the Tanakh, that are used as foundations for the Seder. There's one that's in Sefer Shemot, in the 6th chapter of Exodus, and then there's one that's in Sefer Devarim, which actually is a large chunk of the Seder, which is in the 26th chapter of Deuteronomy. And both of those really do end with talking about coming to Israel. And so the freedom that we're talking about is not just sort of an abstraction, I'm not a slave anymore. It's, I'm not a slave, and then I'm capable of determining my own destiny. And that is really where Israel comes in, is that we're going to build our own destiny. So is it different this year, the second year after October 7th? I mean, certainly in many large ways. I think that the hurt of that attack and the vulnerability we feel. I mean, Angela was just talking about a potential attack on her synagogue. And there's this whole tsunami of anti-Semitism that's been whipped up since October 7th. So I think that since October 7th, we just look at it a little bit differently. Maybe looking at it and saying, aha, now I understand what this is all saying. And maybe at the same time saying something that Angela said earlier, this could all slip away if we don't take it seriously.
Yeah. I think for me, I always look to the Seder to remind myself that both vigilance for the Jewish people and empathy for the other are built into who we are, right? Because you can pluck different verses from the Haggadah and say, well, we begin by welcoming the stranger. We take out a drop of wine with our cup to know that our redemption happened by way of the suffering even of our oppressors, also created in God's image, that we know the heart of the stranger because we were once strangers in a strange land, right? Empathy is all over the Passover Haggadah. And there's also a strand of vigilance, right? There's a passage in the Haggadah that says, in every generation a new Pharaoh arises to destroy us. There's a passage in, many people, when you stand up and you welcome Elijah, you sing Eliyahu Hanavi, but if you actually look at the text, it says, Shvo chamatcha al hagoyim asher lo yada'ucha, that pour out your wrath upon the nations who don't acknowledge you, right? This is harsh stuff. And so for me, and I think this is where our relationship with Israel comes in post-October 7th, but really always, is for those who say you have to pick one or the other. I say, look at the Haggadah, right? One can be a staunch defender of Israel's right to self-defense, self-determination, that the atrocities of October 7th never happen again, never mind the anti-Semitism here in America. And one can have empathy for Palestinian suffering. And these ideas are not opposites, but they're actually the double helix of our DNA. So I actually think this year the Haggadah speaks to this moment as urgently as any year.
I think that Jews don't believe in individual redemption. We believe in collective redemption. So as we are coming out of Egypt, and I love that sense of empathy and vigilance that's present, but we might have come out, but someone else is not redeemed. And until they are, none of us are. So that L'Shana Haba'ah B'Yerushalayim for me is that sort of the metaphorical shalom of peace that basically descends on all people, and we're just never there yet. We're going to continue to see this story. As you said, the Exodus story didn't just happen way back when. We keep seeing the ways that this story of Exodus has continued to happen, not only for our people, but other people who are coming out from their Mitzrayim, from their narrow places, and yet we are not there yet. So I think this sense that there's always an aspiration that we're not going to get there until maybe the days of the Messiah, but really until all people are free, that there is a sense, that an obligation to understand that there has to be a collective redemption for us to all be free.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's so interesting. I mean, Elliott, you started, and it's always that where do you find that middle ground between being trusting or to have trust in others and not being naive? Mm-hmm. And I think after October 7th, a lot of people felt like we've been naive. Now the question is how are we ever going to recover our trust? And we're sort of pulling between the two. And then, universalism and particularism. I mean, we need to take care of ourselves. Mm-hmm. And we should never apologize for taking care of ourselves. And by the way, you need to take care of yourselves first, before you take care of others. And anyone who sort of inverts that and says, well, let me take care of others before I take care of myself, you actually have to wonder their moral grounding, because you're not taking care of yourself and your family, and you're running around to try to take care of others. So, but that doesn't negate, of course we need to have that larger vision. And as Angela put it, the story of redemption, as it's told in Isaiah, it's a redemption of the Jewish people, but at the same time it's a redemption of the world. I always love, Professor Avi Ravitsky used to say, is that there were two exiles, one from Israel and one from the Garden of Eden. And that the ultimate vision of redemption is for both of them. And so we should never, ever stop following the visions of Isaiah, following the visions of the Torah, that everybody's created in the image of God. And it's always negotiating that way between caring about self, not being naive, and then learning how to blossom and still bring this larger vision to the world.
Beautiful.
Amen. Amen.
Absolutely.
I think I think we'd be remiss if we didn't just name the fact that the hostages remain in captivity. Please God, some living. We know some no longer living, but I think we have as urgent a message of liberation from captivity this year as we do have any year. Angela, I want to put you on the spot because I know something that everyone else might not know, which is that you have a book that is going to be coming out. It's not yet published, but I know its title, and it is called, I believe, Heart of a Stranger. Do I have that right?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
So I have to imagine that a book with the title Heart of a Stranger has something to do with the themes we're discussing now. So can you give us like a four-spice or maybe a bit of Torah from it that maybe we could bring to our Passover seders this year?
I love that. Well, I'll tell you a funny thing first, which is that it was originally, I wanted to call it Soul of a Stranger, and my publisher, Not a Jewish Press, said, well, soul feels very religious. And I said, you do realize this is a memoir of a rabbi, right? But okay, well, we'll change it to heart. Okay, anyway, but that aside, I wanted to both tell, I really believe that theology is autobiographical. I say that in the name of Rabbi David Ellenson, my teacher, who always used to say that. So in many ways, telling the story of my life to this point is really a way to also talk about why I am actually the Jew that I am. And my family story, both on my Korean side as well as, of course, my Jewish side, is a story of crossing over and being strangers in many different places. And I remember that for me, the Haggadah and this story was really deeply compelling because so many of our Jewish laws are framed in, you were once the stranger in Egypt, so therefore don't oppress the stranger, therefore don't do this other thing. There are so many things that come from the foundation of knowing what it is to have the heart of a stranger. What I realized is that, of course, this is not just from the Haggadah, it is from the origin story of our people, the Abraham and Sarah, when they are called to begin Judaism, they're asked to leave their birthplace and their home and their family and to go to a place they do not know. And as they cross over the river Euphrates, they ya'avor, and that is where that word ivri comes from, meaning to be a Hebrew is literally to be a boundary crosser. So that is, I think, the essence of what it is to be a Jew is you can't actually be a Jew from the comfort of home, from a place where you feel completely powerful and sovereign. In some way, almost, you have to actually know what it's like to feel like you are a stranger in a strange place. And when we make those crossings, whether it is physical and geographic, or sometimes it is about crossing gender expectations or expectations that familial expectations or conceptions of ourself. So I personally have had a bunch of those crossings myself, having been born in another country and being an immigrant. I think growing up at a time when there were times where I was challenged even to be seen as a Jew within the Jewish community, to be a female rabbi in a male-dominated. I love my male colleagues, but I still feel very outnumbered as a woman leading a community. And I think that each one of those, in some ways, what having the heart of a stranger does ultimately for us is breed exactly what you talked about, I hope, Elliott, which is that that it actually breeds more empathy and creativity and resilience and a kind of expansiveness. We're living in a time right now where I'm really struck by how much everyone feels like they're a stranger. You know, you talk to minority groups, they feel like they're a stranger in America. Asians feel like strangers in America. But Jews feel more like a stranger in America. But here's a crazy thing. White Christian men feel like they're strangers in America right now. If we are all in that place, perhaps instead of seeing this as like the source of our many, many divisions and building more walls, we could actually say, maybe this is actually the common denominator of our humanity. And let's actually be more kind to each other. Let's actually have more empathy for each other in this moment, because we know what it's like to have the heart of a stranger. And I think Judaism gives us a handbook for how to go in the most positive direction with the heart of a stranger, rather than into the negativity or the wall building or the polarization that can also come from feeling like a stranger. So Jews have known how to do this, and I think we have a message to teach the world. That's what I hope the book will share in some way.
Kind of goes back to what Chaim was saying earlier about the difference between feeling like a host and feeling like you're a stranger and you're coming in.
That's literally one of the chapters. So I tell the narrative, and then I have a Devar Torah for every chapter, and each one is based around a Hebrew concept. And when I have the chapter of what it's like for us to come to America, and my mother becomes almost an obsessive host of her sisters that she brings from Korea. Then she becomes an ESL teacher and hosts immigrants in our home who she teaches. Then she actually becomes someone who places children into host families. So I was sort of like, my mom was obsessively a host. And it hit me, and then my Devar Torah afterward is Hachnasat Orchim, and I tell the story of Abraham, and it kind of hits me, this exact story that you just said, Chaim, which is maybe both Abraham and my mother were responding in the way they did with such extreme hospitality, because once they were hosting, they were no longer the stranger. So my mother, when she hosted her sister, she became the American suddenly, because she was the American hosting her more green, younger sister. Right. And so it's a transformative thing, not just for the stranger, but for yourself, especially if you are not living where you're at home. So I think that is a deep message.
Yeah, I often think of the well-known verse that we begin a service, Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, that we welcome everyone, and in its original setting, how goodly are your tents, O house of Jacob, that it's actually was first recited by a non-Jew, right? The prophet Bilam in the Torah. And so for me, it's always, I don't know if there was an intentionality with it, but the very verse that you welcome everyone into your sanctuary is spoken by someone not of the faith, which for me, I sort of meditate on this as it's happening, and I look out at my community and I say, there's someone in this room who's never walked into a sanctuary before. There's someone in this room for whom this is new territory. and it's just a good check to always look at the world from the outside in, not just from the inside out.
Yes.
Yeah, no, to have that wider picture, to sort of see the world. I mean, you need to see the world as yourself, because you can never not be yourself, but to still have that ability to sort of see a much larger picture and to also understand yourself, right? In other words, what does another person look at me, and why am I doing what I'm doing? Yeah. It's a very powerful thought. And I think that sometimes, I mean, if I have to talk about how the Jewish world sort of fills out, is that there's some parts of the Jewish world that spend a lot of time thinking about how the rest of the world looks at them. And then there are other parts of the Jewish world that spend their entire time thinking about themselves and, looking out and just saying, well, we're going to judge everyone else. And it's, you need to be able to look at it both ways. Yeah. You need to have both perspectives.
Yeah, the Scottish poet Robert Burns, not a rabbi, not a Jew, said, "What a gift the giftee gives us to see ourselves as others see us." And so that ability to outside in and inside out. So it's, I think that's what the Passover Haggadah is all about.
That's right.
From beginning to end.
Highly recommended, by the way.
Yeah, it's a bestseller.
I mean, we have authors
Beloved
of
for
amazing
generations.
books here at the table. I mean, we do need to mention that Rabbi Cosgrove wrote a wonderful book,
Right.
more Purim themed.
Yeah, but an excellent Afikomen gift this year.
There we go.
Next year, it should be Angela's book, which screams Afikomen gift.
That's right.
But
Read the chapter. You can read more on empathy and vigilance, amongst other many very powerful chapters. I highly recommend it.
Yeah.
I think before we end, we should end on some kind of positive note, like what we're looking forward to in Lashana Ba'a, or either that, or like what you're looking forward to at your own seder.
Well, let's start with.
Oh gosh, I mean, I do pray every day, as I think we all do, for the hostages to be free, and we are at a time where the sense of kind of upheaval and war is back in Israel and in Gaza, and it is very hard to feel that we can feel free when that is happening across the world. So I deeply pray for that, and I hope that here in America that we can continue to build bridges and use maybe some of the incredible spiritual technologies of this Haggadah to build more connections within our own families, within our own communities, across the divide with other faiths. We need to do that more than ever, and I think our tradition has taught us how to do it. We just have to use those tools.
Amen. I'm going to say ditto to that. I think that if we can listen, engage in dialogue, engage with each other in a way that I think is, the genius of the Haggadah, I think it's an antidote to many of the ills that plague us right now. So I don't wish that Passover lasts beyond its 8 days. I like my chametz, but I hope the teachings of Passover extend well beyond into the year ahead.
No, I would say also that for me the Haggadah is very much a book of hope. And you think of Jews who lived well before 1948. And they picked this up, and every year they said to themselves, well, maybe something good will happen for us. And for me, that's my prayer this year, is that those who have lost hope, God should give them hope, and they should find that hope. And there are so many brokenhearted people. And so I hope this year at the Seder, as they're going through the entire ritual, somehow that inspiration of hope comes to them.
Amen.
Amen.
Lashana haba, Yerushalayim.
Yeah, so this has been amazing, and I know that we love coming together. I guess Shavuot is the next holiday we have to do. I don't know when we have to do that, or Rosh Hashanah. We did Rosh Hashanah already.
We did.
We did.
We have to stay in the good graces of JBS.
That's right, that's right. We need to stay with them, but this has really been wonderful, and we wish everyone out there, we wish them a wonderful Pesach. I wish both of you just have a beautiful Seder and a beautiful Pesach with your families.
Thank you, you too. Amen. Chag Sameach, everyone.
Chag Sameach.